Okay, now that we're in Zbrush, I'm going to go ahead and start importing all of our object files from the layout in Max. So I'm going to start just by grabbing each of these elements and then just click and drag to put them on your, bring them into Zbrush, and if you hit T shortcut will bring you into the drawing mode. From here though, we just want to save this out as a ZBrush tool. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in ZBrush file and just keep this name the same. So we're just going to do this for the rest of our objects here. Document. Save this out. Keep making new documents and getting all these objects in. Background. The ground may look a little weird when you draw it out because you won't see it, set your edge on, but it will draw into place. We'll get all the spires in. Okay, now that we have all of our objects converted to Z tools, I'm going to go ahead and grab all of them and load them all in. So you can see them all populating on the right. Just going to keep on my back cave wall, just drag out with the mouse, and then hit T to enter sculpting mode. Now if I enter the subtool mode, I'm going to add in all the other pieces of geometry by hitting append. So I'm going to grab the character, going to grab the ground, all the rock formations, get the right side ones, and the stand. Now you can see we've got all the pieces. It looks just like we had in Max. I'm going to go ahead and save this out. It's going to have all the pieces in it. Let's call it all objects. So this is everything put together. Now here in the subtools, we can select individual pieces of geometry. You'll see it's highlighted, which means we can work with that piece. When you hit the eyeball, it'll isolate that one piece, or you can hide other pieces by hitting their eyeball. Okay, for now, I'm going to go ahead and single in on this guy. We're going to go ahead and start sculpting. From here under geometry, I'm going to divide this. Normally if you just hit this, you'll see it'll smooth the object, and that's not what I want to be doing for these rock formations. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that, and then unclick that smooth modifier, the SMT, and then dividing. And it'll keep the square rock formations, but now we'll have more detail that we can work with. This is more of an aesthetic thing because of this shot, that I want to keep these crystalline formations on the rocks when I'm sculpting. So I'm going to go up to 6 divisions here. And that should give me plenty of room to work here. Okay, right now I'm using my tablet. Bring this down to 5. One of the first things here that I like using is the clay buildup tool. You'll see me bring this menu up a lot. I'm just hitting the space bar to bring up these menus. And under the clay buildup, if you switch the stroke to a spray with this square alpha channel, you can hold Alt to remove from the object. And you can start to add some noise and some overall detailing, especially if you use a large brush. Start to break up the forms. Just going to add some variance. If you switch back to the normal freehand with a small brush, again using the square alpha channel, you can create these kind of square tubes, and just keeping in line with the crystalline structure, you can start adding detail. And again, holding Alt to remove if you want to carve out. And just get these kind of smaller crystals appearing on the larger ones. You can also do it on corners to flatten them out. Again, just working along with the shapes of the geometry. Just reinforce what we have here. Just adding and removing. And I'm holding Shift to smooth. And one of the other tools is this flatten tool. This tool is really nice for flattening out some of the hard corners. Just adds a nice little bevel to some of the corners. Or just for flattening out and getting rid of some of the stepping. Yeah, when the pen goes blue, I'm holding Shift to smooth out some of these areas. Something else too in the clay buildup. If these striation kind of lines in the brush are too much, you can go under stroke and you'll see you can change the lazy mouse settings and change the lazy step to increase the number of steps and remove some of the striations you get in the brush. So I can go down to 0.05. You'll just get less stepping. And the planar tool is one that I use a lot. Once you have some of this height variation, you can come in. And again, I like to switch to the square alpha channel, just so I'm keeping these hard edges. But depending where your initial selection is, it'll take a sample of that area and then try to continue a flat plane based on that initial sample. And if you hold Alt, it'll grow areas as opposed to carving them out. And so you can regain some hard edges on some of these crystals. And this will give you some of the hard edges back that you may have lost using the other brushes. It's kind of a refinement step. You can see it's giving me nice hard edges. Well, now that this time, I'm going to subdivide this with the smooth on, just to interpolate between the previous smooth step, since we're already at a high level. Just smoothing so that I can continue carving some of these shapes. Just trying to keep with this crystalline rock formation that we had in the initial concepts. Just zooming out to check the model. And then just go back to the clay buildup spray. Maybe do another pass to roughen things up. Just add some more variance. I'm just using this very sparingly to add some overall indentations to the rocks. Kind of make it look like there's smaller pieces that have built up into these larger forms. And just detailing some of the ends, kind of where more rock is broken off, make it a little rougher. Just a little more noisy and less uniform on the ends here. And back to the planer brush. The way I'm working here is mostly because of the way the rocks were initially laid out in the concepts. So if you're doing rocks that are more like boulders or rocks that you'd find along the water, you may not necessarily use these techniques, but for more crystalline rock formations, getting this kind of sci-fi geometric rocks, these are the techniques that I found worked out very well. In the White Storm projects, a lot of the stuff we used had a very geometric look. We kind of had some backstory that the race of people we were trying to represent had a very geometric look to all their surroundings, to the buildings the buildings they built and the vehicles they built. And so we wanted to reflect that in a certain way in the environments. Even though they didn't build the environments, it would kind of show that maybe this geometric inspiration came from the environments, and that's where it started, and the people kind of just picked it up from there and brought it into everything they made. So again, these square brushes work really well for keeping these faceted shapes. Now over here, I'm going to move over to the ground plane. I'm just going to single this out. Just divide this, turning off the smoothing. I usually check what the detail's like just by drawing on the surface and seeing how faceted it gets. Let's go one more. Okay, from here I'm going to show how we can use that brush we made in Max. So here under the alpha, I'm going to go to import, go to my render output, and here we've got that rock debris Z depth we made. Let's hit open. Changing the stroke to a drag rectangle. If I drag out here, you can see it's placing the rock formations that we made. Let's add the division here. So here, if I rotate around, you can see we're getting these rocks. This nice little span. You can also experiment with using the spray to kind of draw out some gravel. And then you can smooth it if you want to kind of break it up. But it creates a bunch of small rocks here. You want to be a little careful with the noise here. So I'm going to decrease the intensity here. And then draw these out. Just to break up the surface a bit. Some bigger rocks along the edge. And I can switch back to the rectangle and place specific rocks in specific areas. Let's go back to my subtools and bring back my other rock formations so I can kind of see where they are. Bring this intensity back up. Just add some debris around my formations. They've maybe broken off of these larger crystals. Go back to some spray. Just place these rocks as I see fit. As far as these rocks, you can see that it's extruding them up from the geometry. So this isn't something you'll necessarily want to use close to camera, depending on the shot. But as a background element, is something to fill in and break out the background, this works really well. For some of the closer rocks or debris, we'll be using the 3D objects we made in Max and place those up front. So this is more just to fill in the background and to break up the texture that'll later be going on the ground. So I'm just smoothing out some of the peaks here so it's not so bad when we're looking at it from ground level where the final camera is going to be. Let's check out our stand here. And again, subdivide this without the smooth on. Gonna switch my alpha back. Just check the detail I've got here. So I'm gonna go back to the clay brush. Just hitting spacebar to bring up that menu. And holding Alt, I'm gonna carve out some of this. Just add some wear and tear to this. This little stand in the film held a little device that our character was kind of secreted away in this cave. So the stand was a key section to the shot. So I ended up spending a fair amount of time kind of blocking this out, since I knew it would be one of the focal points of the shot. Using the planer to square off some of these brush strokes. So here I'm kind of just using the clay buildup to give me something to work with, and then switching back to the planer and holding Alt to build up these forms. You're getting some nice geometric sections to the rock. You can do the opposite by hitting Alt and carving out with the clay brush. Again, just kind of feeling out what seems to be working and not working. You can find reference footage of rocks, certain rocks that you like and want to use, kind of use to get ideas for how these might look. Kind of get inspired by what you can find. Then you go back to the spray and break this up a little bit. Just holding Alt to kind of break up these forms. Just check the overall look here. Okay, I'm gonna save this out. Let's save this as a new version. From here, once you get a rock looking really nice, and you think you may be done with that specific rock, from here I'm going to show you really quickly how I go about exporting each of these rocks back into Max. So from here, go to our Z plugin and go to Decimation Master, and make sure Freeze Borders and Keep UVs are on. This will keep our original UV space that we made in Max that's already on this object. Otherwise, it'll remove it and you'll lose that information. So from here, I want to maybe knock this down. This one I may not knock down that much. I'm going to set it to 50%. Hit enter. And do a preprocess current. It'll calculate out, and then do a decimate current. It's a very small change. You may have missed it. But it decimated this down. You can see as I drop here how nasty the geometry is. So you still want to save out a version that's not decimated in case you want to go back and make changes. Once you decimate, it can be a problem to go back and continue adding detail to a mesh that's not very nice to work with. But for getting into Max, this will help ease the render time by letting the load of each of these pieces of geometry. So now that I've decimated, we can go to Export and export an OBJ. So it'd be cave stand, let's call it high poly. So that would be our high poly export from Zbrush that we'll bring back into Max. Save that out. So you can continue working on the rest of the rocks and detailing them out in the same way. And working on the background as well. Our background wall. And once we have all the pieces finished, I'll be bringing them back into 3D Studio Max, doing some texturing and lighting in Vray, and showing you how everything comes together to create the final shot. So let's say this one more time. And we'll continue sculpting out the rest of these pieces.